Hello and welcome to our webcast for August 24, 2018.
Woo!
So, just after vacation. So, it's great.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Christian Aubry, and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet.
Hi.
And also joining us, Taylor Ayat, our policy analyzers, outreach coordinator. Okay.
Hi.
Okay, Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet is a non-religion organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminate against people with disabilities. Today we have two topics. First one is web broadcast mission accomplished and ongoing. Yeah. And the second one is recap of news from the summer. So we need it. Amy will help us with all those things.
It's easier to say recap in English.
Yeah.
Recapitulation.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the first topic is a webcast mission accomplished and ongoing. So welcome to our new season of Getting Lost on the Page of our webcast. One of the goals that we had when we launched Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet in 2013 was to create a collection of information in English and French about the disability rights-based opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices.
In French is very important because there is not so much things
nothing
produced.
Yeah, there's the groups in France that oppose assisted suicide are almost all religious. There are a few individuals that take it from a disability perspective, but there's no organization there. One part of that effort has been our webcasts. For 5 years now, we've been doing weekly webcasts in English and French on the stakes for people with disabilities of laws and policies that allow euthanasia and assisted suicide. Also, since 2015, we've been sending our script to our subscribers as a way to keep in touch and make the text accessible for people who don't hear. Because obviously, well, not obviously, but doing something for a broadcast is very beyond our technical ability. So this is a compromise, and it's not a perfect solution, but it is a compromise. Okay, so since we started, we followed the adoption of the euthanasia laws in Quebec and Canada, euthanasias of ineligible people in Quebec, the failure to properly monitor the practice across the country, and continuing efforts to widen eligibility criteria. We've also tried to explain in simple and accessible language complex and important topics in the field of ending life ethics.
This is very important because just telling what is the law, the way that the law are written, it's not the way we should do.
Yeah,
because
if we just read the laws,
no,
they're impenetrable.
Yes, we have to give you the right information so it could be intelligible. Okay,
yep.
Is it a word in English?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yep. Okay, so over 5 years, we have produced about 350 30-minute webcasts. That's give or take. Hopefully, the webcasts will serve as a helpful resource for advocates, researchers, and anyone who wants more information about assisted suicide, euthanasia, and related topics.
And it is very important. All our texts have references so you could look at. This is not the same thing that the people who are in favor of assisted suicide who doesn't do so much reference.
They do.
But not so much.
Yeah.
We do a lot better job than they do.
Whatever. We do fine
You need the Pakistan.
We do our best.
Go with
We
me.
do our best to make the information available and understandable. That's our idea. Let's see. All of our videos are available at a web address, which is in the text, and a list of our video topics for each date can be found at another address, which is also in the text. And the text of our webcasts can be found online at our Facebook page and on our website. So if you ever want to know what we've talked about in 2014, you can go and find it. Okay. Did you want to add anything about that, Taylor?
No, I would say the most recent useful change to that whole archive was that we actually put them in so that the date the episode was published on is the date that WordPress thinks it's published on. So you don't have to go looking for two different dates in order to find everything.
That was very helpful. And, the other thing is, it's not all, it's far from being good news, most of it. It's pretty sad and depressing. And it's not fun to have to give bad news like this, but I think it's a really important exercise, both to create an opus of work, a body of work, but also to be the recorders of history in this sense. So we've recorded some history and we followed things for several years, and we can say you can now look online, and if you do a Google search on some of our topics, you'll find our webcasts.
Yep.
So that's pretty exciting.
And it's also important because there are a bunch of different perspectives in end-of-life debates, and we have a unique and important one that is often overlooked, and it shouldn't be.
Yes. And in fact, I would say almost always overlooked, except by us. So the next topic is a recap of news from the summer. This week, we'll be doing a quick recap of the most important assisted suicide-related news that broke over the summer. In June, the Accessible Canada Act was tabled just before we took our summer break.
Yeah, just before, so we couldn't do anything with it except read it.
Right, exactly. After that, Taylor and I wrote a blog outlining a few of the problems with the bill, and we will talk about them in more detail on next week's webcast. But if you look at the text, you'll find a link to our blog entry where we talked about it. And essentially, the law as it's proposed is very incomplete and weak, in my humble opinion.
Okay, and this is the reason why they just announced it at the end, just at the vacation, at the holiday. Why? Because at this date, nobody look around. So if there is any trouble, it will be very low and nobody will hurt us.
Yeah,
right.
That's the standard tactic of government.
Yeah, and I have to say that I was involved with the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So for me, that's the gold standard. And the Canadian law falls far short, really, in taking itself seriously and as a document to be taken seriously. Okay, anyway, we'll talk about that next week. In July, TVNDY submitted comments for a consultation on palliative care held by the federal government. We submitted a paper describing the impact of palliative care on ill and disabled people, specialized training needed for caregivers and healthcare providers, problems in accessing palliative care, and ways to provide palliative care in a person-centered way.
Yeah, the training must be for everybody, not only the doctor and
nurses, but also the volunteers and
all people involved.
Right. And I actually got an email from Diane Coleman who thanked me for having done that because there hadn't been anything similar in the United States. There had been no such call for consultation. And so the comments that I had written were helpful to create a base of information about that topic. So that's good.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, on July 10th, Danielle Pilote, a resident of a long-term care facility in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in Quebec, along with the Conseil pour la protection des malades, filed a class action lawsuit against the Quebec government over the deplorable and dangerous living conditions in Quebec's nursing homes. The lawsuit lists 22 examples of living conditions that plaintiffs find unacceptable. Everything from problems with food, inadequate staffing levels, to poor hygiene and a lack of air conditioning.
And poor hygiene are catastrophic because that's the way you have epidemic conditions.
Yeah, and there are often runs of CDPC that just go through the center and people die from it.
Yes.
Because the place is not kept clean enough. And
it's a matter of
right.
death and life of people living there. And people who are not affected by may live for many, many years. But if you live in CHSLD in Quebec, too bad, you may die soon.
Right. And we, there, in the text, there is a link to an article about this topic, so you can get more information there. All right, also in July, Robert Latimer asked Canada's Justice Minister for a new trial or a pardon of his murder conviction for killing his disabled daughter, Tracy, in 1993. Taylor wrote a blog on her sense of kinship she feels with Tracy, and what it was like to grow up hearing Tracy's name in the news. She was also interviewed for an article in Maclean's magazine. Did you want to say anything about that, Taylor?
I'm not sure what there is to say except
read the blog.
Pardon?
Read the blog.
Yes, read the blog. Essentially, I was a year and a half old when Tracy died, and we were diagnosed with the same condition, and so for lack of a better word, her name and her story were always kind of a shadow hanging over me. Mm-hmm. And it's strange and frightening to see Tracy's father back in the public eye asking for society's ethical shifts to pardon him, to pretend he didn't do what he did.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny too. No, not funny, haha, but funny.
Strange, funny.
That I also got my start in this movement in part through the Latimer case, because I was in law school, and that was one of the cases that prompted me to do a paper on prosecution and sentencing of parents who kill their disabled children. So we were at very different points, and we both got launched by the Latimer case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In addition, TVNDY is working on a letter to the Justice Department explaining the reasons we believe the request should be denied. Okay, the next item is Health Canada released the final version of its regulations to monitor euthanasia and assisted suicide only 2 years later.
Yeah, 2 whole years. Well done, guys.
Yeah.
And it was not so good.
Yeah.
No.
Unfortunately, they didn't take many of TVNDY's suggestions or critiques into account. And they had, this whole list of providers and nursing home owners and people who wrote in their commentaries, lots and lots of doctors and nurses, and oh, by the way, only 3 advocacy organizations.
And they paired us with the United Church.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite incensed about.
So our comments, you know, we made tons and tons and tons of comments, and in their little summary of the comments, they only picked out a few that we had made. So they didn't really respond to most of what we had pointed out were the problems. So it's unfortunate that the final regulations are not going to deal with the problems that we brought up. Okay.
That's sad.
The regulations still reduce complex information to checkboxes and drop-down menus when reporting assisted suicide and euthanasia, which don't provide a complete picture of the reasons behind the requests.
And this is what is important to monitor, because we want to know if the law is effective or not.
Right.
If you don't have this information, you have nothing.
Right. And we need to know why people are asking for assisted suicide, because it's not enough to say that the person has an irremediable medical condition that's causing them suffering. That's not specific enough. We need more specific information about what the people are needing and what they aren't getting. And their plan will not collect that information. And we rely very heavily on the Oregon reports that do collect some fairly detailed information on that subject. And if we didn't have it, we would be sunk in terms of being able to explain why people with disabilities are so directly affected. So it's really a problem that Canada isn't going to collect this information. Let's see.
It was the demographics.
Yeah. Instead of detailed demographic information, Health Canada relies on postal codes as well as information submitted to the federal government through other channels like tax records and census forms.
Which are not linked.
Right. Again.
So, no use.
Right. Again, they would have to get that information and put it out, you know, go across and get the information and match it with the information about the person making the request. And they're not going to do that. They say, oh, well, we'll do that, but they won't. And so we won't have the demographic information. And also, somebody's postal code isn't going to tell you their race. It's not going to tell you the first language they speak. It's not going to tell you a lot of important things about
what services are they receiving.
Yes, exactly. So, again, this doesn't say much about external pressures and life circumstances that make assisted suicide seem attractive. So,
and if you're homeless or disadvantaged in other ways, you might not have access to the kinds of records that Health Canada wants to use.
right.
That's in addition to everything that's being ignored.
Right.
And so what kind of effect might the lack of records have on somebody's request as it goes through the system?
Right, exactly. If the person doesn't have, if they're homeless, they don't count, essentially. So, yeah, it's a problem. Okay, also in July, pursuant to the regulations, the health minister emphasizes that, quote, investigating instances of non-compliance with the eligibility criteria and procedural safeguard falls outside the scope of the federal monitoring regime.
They said themselves that it's not enough.
Right. Well, no, they said they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
We don't have to do it, and we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's up to local law enforcement, which is
yes.
Yeah, which nobody will take care of because there is no money, no organization, no rules, no nothing.
Right. The local law enforcement people don't have motivation or expertise or money.
exactly.
So much for the quote unquote carefully designed system for assisted suicide and euthanasia, imposing stringent limits that are scrupulously monitored and enforced. That was called for by the Supreme Court.
Rule of the Supreme Court.
Right. That's
in the Carter case.
Right. In the Carter case, that is the direct quote from the Carter case.
Which is the base of those laws.
Right. So it was supposed to be a stringent, carefully designed system with stringent limits and scrupulously monitored. But when
you just have taken a part of that and just don't look at the other part. That's it.
Right. When they say it falls outside the scope of federal monitoring regime, they say not our
problem.
Not our problem. Dang. Okay. Roger Foley, the London, Ontario man who has lived in his local hospital for 2 years after being provided with inadequate and even dangerous home care services, has released audio and video footage of doctors offering assisted suicide as the solution to his problems. So
yeah, you will be better then.
Yeah, and I listened to the audio recordings, and they're like, "Well, why don't you want assisted suicide?"
So 3 of us are disabled. We love our life. And most people who live with disability like their life. Okay, like anybody else who are not disabled. That's a problem that people who are not disabled could not understand.
Right. And
when
problems that we run into are caused by discrimination more than our disabilities.
Yes.
Right. When you don't like your life as a disabled person, the question to ask is not, would you like to end it? It's, what are you missing to help you live a more satisfying and independent life?
Right. Okay. In August, a bill that would have legalized assisted suicide throughout Australia was defeated in the country's Senate by 2 votes after 2 senators who were initially in favor of it changed their minds.
Okay. And the law and the system of Australia is very, very close of the Canada one because it was created by the same system, which is the British system.
Yeah, and also it's important to remember that this is all of Australia, not there. It's been legalized in Victoria and another province. It was once legalized in the Northern Territories, but they repealed it because it was so discriminatory against Indigenous people. Yeah. So Pat Dodson, a senator from the Labour Party, who opposed the bill, mentioned that the introduction of legal assisted suicide by the bill, suicide would only add to the biases and systemic disadvantages faced by Indigenous Australians. And it's absolutely true.
And it is true here in Canada that disabled people are discriminated.
Right. And First Nations people are as well. But for some reason, the people who are involved in suicide prevention are not making the connection between the discrimination experienced by First Nations people and the high levels of disability in that population and the discrimination that people with disabilities face in assisted suicide and euthanasia.
Yeah.
And finally, the Dutch doctor who slipped a sedative into coffee given to a woman with dementia and asked the woman's family to hold her down so her euthanasia procedure could be completed was reprimanded.
Just a slap in his
slap on the wrist, yes.
He killed somebody, but
yeah, by the Dutch board that investigates medical complaints. So,
and that's the only one.
Right. This is the first time that a practitioner has been reprimanded since the Netherlands euthanasia law was passed in 2002. According to local news reports, well, the public prosecutor will announce after the summer if the doctor will face criminal prosecution, but I bet he won't. I bet he won't.
I bet the same thing.
Because, disabled people, killing a disabled person.
Yeah. And I think there's another layer there in that people, pardon me, wouldn't necessarily consider being elderly or having or having dementia as a disability on the same level as conditions that we have.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, I ran into that when I first came to Montreal. I wanted to, I was thinking about moving into the L'Arche community, which is people with and without cognitive disabilities living together in an integrated setting. It's set up by Jean Vanier, very famous guy. And I went to there and I was explaining why, I wanted to move there. And I said, I think also there could be some benefit to the people based on the fact that I'm a peer. And he said, you're not a peer of these people. These are people with cognitive disabilities. I said, I have a disability. They have a disability. We're peers. We share the experience of discrimination. And the guy who's in charge of this place just had no concept that even though I have, quote unquote, have intelligence, that I might consider myself a peer with people with intellectual disabilities. It's just bizarre. Anyway. Okay, so if Taylor, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No. I'm not sure what to think about the reaction you received from that guy. Yeah. I am kind of surprised, but kind of not.
It was,
I don't know,
a little surprising to me because I had had a meeting at a L'Arche center in Massachusetts before, and if the problem was I was moving out of the U.S., so I couldn't move in there, but they were very welcoming and they were really ready to have me move in. So it had been a really positive experience. And then I come up, this guy is like, oh, what a jerk. He's like, well, how are you going to make sure that somebody's got his buttons done right? It's like, oh, man. Anyway.
Wouldn't the first question be, excuse the intrusiveness, but if he's worried about somebody else's buttons, why isn't he worried about yours?
Yeah. So anyway, if you want more information about the subjects we discuss, even the subjects that are off the topic, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. You can visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks very much to Christian and to Taylor for helping out. And thank you to you for being there. Have a good week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.